Welcome to another episode of ResourceFULL. My name's Tom Manners, and full because the internet is full of resources that are shared so freely by so many good people. And today we are full because I've got 5 of us talking about the awesome website that we want to discuss, how you use it effectively in the classroom, how it's used maybe efficiently, how it's used best. It's the 12th episode of these, and I've reached my peak. Will I ever get more than 5 people into one Zoom room? I don't know. We're going to discuss Frayer models. These are absolutely fantastic resources, but let's find out from the people who have helped put together a superb website. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've got 4 guests today: Ben Rapley, Tom Dolan, Jo Gledhill, Peter Mattock. I hesitated because I need to ask you, should I say Joe Locke, because your Twitter handle confuses me. But people, come on down.
Good day, Tom.
There we go. Hi, everybody. Now, Joe, I'm sure it should be Jo Gledhill.
It can be either. I've kind of used both.
Oh, no, in which case, fair enough. Bit of a hesitant start to today's proceeding, but this is going to be really fascinating because I think 2-3 years ago I first came across the model and I just saw a use for it. But I'm hearing more and more people talking about benefits that I haven't considered here. Now, the reason we have so many of you, and thank you all for joining in, Pete, I got in touch with you because this is your 3rd time here. You're just a regular on the show. But that's because you put so many resources together. When I asked you about this website, you said, I want Ben, I want Joe, I want Tim. So can you give me the story of the website and why so many guests? It's great.
Yeah, so, I mean, similar to you, actually, it was a good few years ago that I first saw these. And I think it was actually in Joe's maths comp session that I actually saw the first one. And then Ben did a maths comp session as well where he referenced them. And it sort of started a discussion on Twitter. There was a little thread going on Twitter. Tim joined in as well about Frayer models and literally what we're going to talk about today, their use, creation, things like that. And I can't remember which of us suggested it. It might have been me, it might have been Tim, it might have been any of us, I can't remember at all. There should be a website for these things where, we can put a load on and people can do it. So I set up a DM group on Twitter and with these guys who were sort of participating a lot in that thread and said, actually, let's put this together, set up the domain and sort of put the rough formatting to the actual site itself. And then we just all started writing Frayer models and collaborating with them and sticking them up. And the site was born from there, really.
I think it's brilliant. I mean, I say it nearly every episode I do of this now, that we're in a golden age of so much decent sharing. And so, again, I'm sure I'll say it many times, thank you all, because you are doing something for everybody. And with my skit training, with my skit trainees today, we're talking about conceptual understanding. And one of them's only just started. And they said, look, I'm not sure if I know the concepts of some of the work, their early doors in their career. I was like, well, tonight's episode is the one that's going to be the great one for you, because this is really about conceptual understanding. And it's lovely. It's with regards to the big ideas for those of us involved with the NCTM. It's variation. We're seeing what's constant, what's not constant, what can be changed, what can't. You can get representations on there. It's just such a lovely resource. But because we've met you before in this series, I don't need to hear more from you. Let's just introduce everybody else and find out more about them. And so, therefore, ladies first. Joe, can you tell us about yourself and we've heard how you got involved with it, but tell us about yourself and your career briefly.
Okay, my background is mostly as a lead practitioner for maths, although I've dipped in and out of head of department, and I've just started in a new role as head of department at Neam Park Academy in Peterborough. So yeah, in the middle of COVID, it's not the easiest time to start at a new school, but it's been really good, and it's going to be interesting because obviously they don't at the moment use Frayer models at all, and I'm going to be introducing those into the school. I did a quick sort of demo of them in the very limited time we've had as a department so far, and people aren't familiar with them. So it's going to be really exciting sort of getting those introduced and getting those going in the school.
Let's talk and make sure in this hour, we'll talk about how to introduce it then and what kind of things might just work. So that'll be really interesting to do from that perspective. Tim, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, so I've been teaching about 17 years, I think slightly longer than Pete, just about. And I was a head of department for a while. I'm now director of maths for a small multi-academy trust in Leicester. So we've got 6 secondary schools and a 6th form, a few primaries. And the reason I really started looking at Frayer models was we were writing our own curriculum. We're still in the process of doing that. I don't think we'll ever stop. for all the schools, and we wanted to get a lot of vocabulary in. And one of the things that we looked at, actually, not just in maths, but this book came up quite a lot, if you've seen it. But English teachers love this book, but actually reading it, it's really applicable to, yeah, there you go. There you go.
Really as well.
It might have been. So that's where I came across Frayer models for the first time, and thought they fitted really nicely. That we were trying to have a real push on vocabulary and conceptual understanding. So, really good.
Wonderful, thank you, Tim. And finally, sorry, Ben, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I'm a head of maths at Newfield School in Sheffield. I moved there about 2 years ago. I've been teaching for 10 years, and before that, I was another secondary school in Sheffield. And I've done a couple of talks at MathsConf, which is where I've met Pete, and then following on these guys. And we have a real big focus on reading and language, and using the right language at Newfield. And it struck me really when I was at my previous school. I didn't think of it as much of an issue, and I thought, yeah, it's fine. And then it was really clear how wrong I was about how doing all this stuff, and so like the explicit teaching of vocabulary. And so I came across it when we talked about it from English teachers, and thought, oh, that's a lovely English thing, but I'm not sure it applies to maths. But then I started really getting to grips with it and thought, yeah, this is absolutely going to work.
Well, let's have a look at a Frayer model then. I'm going to use just a blank one to start. The features of a Frayer model. So the concept goes in the middle, and then on the top left we see the definition. Top right, its characteristics. But we're talking a lot with variation about the examples and non-examples and how important non-examples are. I have to say, the first time I came across it, now we're going to look at different examples, including ones that aren't even on the website yet. They're that new. You told me beforehand, some people, you've got these prepared for us. So I think my confusion was these two. I mean, I think the examples, you give examples, non-examples, and you think about the ones that might be confused. But for the definition and characteristics, I've often struggled, if I was trying to create my own, before I was aware of the website maybe, because you've written so many of these, you guys, do you ever think you struggle with what you write in those, or how do you go about creating some of them?
Well, I was thinking about this. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, go on.
No,
you
crack
go.
on. That was all of us diving in at
You
once.
go.
Ben, you go.
I was thinking about this the other day because when we were talking about preparing for this, and think just sort of how does it all fit in, and there are, whilst we use the traditional model of the Frayer model, sometimes we play around with it. I think for me, one of the ways most is that the definition would be in its simplest terms what it is, and then the characteristics might be a bit more about like when you might use it, how you might use it, or the etymology or the morphology. So the etymology, like the history of the word, where's it come from, if that is of use or helpful, or the morphology, what are the different component parts of the word, the prefixes or suffixes, and those sorts of additional bits, and I guess the story, the context that can go around that term. Daniel T. Willingham talks about that, as we can really struggle to remember facts sometimes, but actually we are intrinsically programmed to remember stories. And when we're putting in that vocab, some of that history and the context can really help make some of that. So I think that's in the definition, it would be plain text, as simple as possible. This is what it is. And the characteristics might be some of that extra context of that story behind the word.
2 or 4 you wanted to jump in when I asked that question. So what was everyone else thinking then?
I was thinking what Ben was thinking, but not as brilliantly stated.
But Jo, before we start recording, you said, "Oh, are we going to mention this?" And there's a document sat by you that you held up to camera a few moments ago.
Yeah, one of my faves.
I'm going to get you to do it again. The mathematics philosophy for teachers in key stages 1 to 3. You were kind enough to say that I introduced you to, which is nice.
You did.
So I'm going to get it on screen. Here it is. Now, when I'm using Frayer models, or even when I'm using knowledge organizer or trying to design a knowledge organizer, I'm looking for a definition. This is the file I'm going to. But sometimes it's a little wordy. Sometimes, if I've taken this first one here, and a measure of the size of any plane surface, I might be deciding I don't want the word plane because at this stage it might not fit the group, or it might be extra. what's the word I'm looking for here? It might just be, can I do it? It's somewhat easier, perhaps. And I often use maths is fun. So it's nice to have the two, this and the other one, to find the right definition. It's interesting what you said about the characteristics there, Ben, because I haven't thought about that as to how maybe I would find those. But that, I think, Jo, you're absolutely right to bring that up as a glossary. So when you've added these in yourselves, everyone, have you used that glossary, or have you just created your own, or how else have you created some of them? Tim?
Yeah, I've used the glossary, I've used Maths is Fun, all sorts of websites. One of the things that we try and do when we create them is really look at how we can be precise with our definitions, and also think about being forward-looking. So whatever we put in a definition that we might share with, say, Year 7, we want to make sure that if we were going to expand on that for later years, that it's not going to contradict it. So like that example you said about taking out plane, you might take that out in Year 7, but you might then in Year 9, Year 10, you might want to put that back in and expand that definition slightly. So it's making sure that those are as precise as possible, whilst not being something you're going to have to sort of walk back on in order to expand their understanding.
That's interesting, because when we did the Knowledge Organisers with Nicola Whiston, she was saying that she designed them for her scheme of work. And at first, when I first met Knowledge Organisers, I thought you could probably lift and put in, but actually you're being more particular, saying at this stage of learning, this is what I need them to know. I don't always, I know I've said this before, it's something in Mark McCourt's book that's saying we must teach forward. Don't just teach to the current point. But it might be, I don't want those words right now. I'd like a different Frayer model for the same concept, but I can go a little bit deeper. So you can actually have 2 or 3 Frayer models for the same concept, but different year groups.
Absolutely. But I think that's really important, especially with the examples as well. The non-examples, you want to make sure they're appropriate for their level of understanding, but also you want to make sure that they're not going to contradict. So if you had those 2 or 3 different Frayer models for the same concept, put them alongside each other and they will agree with each other. Just you might be simpler on some, which I think is why it's important to think about how you're setting that first definition. Like Ben was saying, it's got to be really plain and simple and straightforward, but it's also got to be as precise as possible.
Should we go to the website and download a couple and show a couple? Because we've talked around that we've seen an empty one. Of all things, when I was preparing for this, I typed in all these things. I actually forgot to type in the website in which we're talking about. So here we go. That was how quick it was to find it, though. Your one-stop site for maths Frayer models. I'm going to challenge you on that sentence a little bit later on. But here's the example you put. And when you do download them, we need to point out it does not say the word preview. So and you've made them all editable. They're really easy to find along the top. So number, for example, and we can choose any of these. Has anyone got a particular favourite here?
The fractions ones are always fun.
Improper then? Let's do it. So
you can actually download it, are you? Oh, nice.
I could have just, gone into my folder where I've downloaded it numerous times, but I might as well just download it again. I've got enough gig space. So you've made these fully editable, which is brilliant. So if we don't fully agree, or I'm trying to achieve something different, as you've mentioned, Tim, for a different year group, we can alter these. Awesome. So the non-examples, actually, what I've seen, and some of the ones you've done, have got drawings of representations. Now, I have actually seen as well. Now, Jo, you'd said before we started recording that you almost want to change one corner of these, because I've seen ones where it didn't say characteristics, it said representations.
Yeah, I think I've just been doing some reading around it recently and thinking about it and making mine slightly different, just to sort of mix it up. And I quite like the idea, rather than definition of characteristics, of having essential characteristics and non-essential characteristics. So the sort of essential, if we thought about a prime number, the essential characteristics would be that it had exactly 2 factors, itself and 1. A non-essential characteristic might be that all prime numbers except 2 are odd, that sort of thing. I think it might make it a little bit more accessible to students rather than a formal definition, which I think is the box they really struggle with. But it's just some ideas I'm kicking around. Pete might want to kill me now.
It's nicer that we don't have. The idea is we take these and we run with them, just like everything else with every resource. You've got to understand it yourself, want to use it in your own way. Because I know the importance of the bottom 2 lines, the top 2 lines. I don't think I've always been very strong with, and that's why I was interested. Certainly what you said about the etymology of it. That's a fascinating way of seeing it. Anything on there that particularly just kind of triggers any thought while looking at this one? But
the other thing that's changed for me, sorry, Am I going really good, Pete? The other thing that's changed to me is when I first started making these years ago, examples and non-examples were sort of not particularly things that were well used. One thing I'm really conscious of now is trying to put non-standard examples into the examples to make sure that we're using those ones that aren't the ones the children specifically think of, because what I'm finding, they ought to know it anyway to enhance their understanding, but also that's the sort of thing that's quite often now coming up in exams for them, those slightly unusual ones, the tweaky ones. And if we haven't exposed the children to them, I think it causes a lot of confusion later on, and they don't fully understand in the way that we would like them to.
Yeah, I like that, and sort of like borderline examples of when it's really close. The other thing for me is we're talking about where defining definitions, and that actually we think a lot about prerequisites in terms of mathematical knowledge and our prior knowledge of what you'd need to know. Also in your definitions, what vocabulary would they already need to know? So when you're looking at that glossary and it had the word plane, actually, if a student's reading that and they're not aware of what that word really means, it creates sort of a cognitive overload and it stops them actually accessing that definition for it to be usable. You know, in that definition there, I'm reading, there's numerator, denominator, equal, magnitude. You need to have sort of sequenced how you're using them to make sure that students are aware of those words first, and they're able to access that before we can start looking at those in our definitions. And so you need to almost be aware of what are your prerequisite definitions and the vocabulary before you start using it into other definitions, if that makes sense.
That goes back to what you were saying, Tom, about really making them fit a particular curriculum or scheme of work. And, you know, this is why they're editable, because you need to be able to fit it in so that the pupils you've got in front of you, you know what they've learned, what they haven't, and make it appropriate for them.
Peter, I know you're going to respond to this.
No, actually, I was just going to say, like, speaking up for the characteristics a little bit, I think they're what actually sort of can help sometimes with the examples and the non-examples, because the examples and the non-examples will illustrate nicely the concept. But if I then throw up an example or something like that on the board and kids are struggling to see whether it's an example or a non-example because it's a boundary example or things like that, then actually one of the things that I will do with it is take them back to the characteristics. Like, for example, on that one, we'll look at where the two numbers are on the number line. Is the denominator closer to 0 than the numerator, and things like that. So the characteristics, depending on, and for me, the characteristics are more or less useful depending on the concepts. There's some concepts where they are really, really good things to have, and there are some concepts where you probably won't refer to them as much, but they can form that sort of not checklist, but that's deciding criteria where a boundary example might be throwing a kid off or something like that.
I'm thinking of going back in geometry and measure, because I think these are superb. I don't think there's a lesson I haven't done in recent times where it's an image or a shape or a polygon, whatever it might be. Polygon, actually, let's go for polygon. I think these are really powerful, and I know the word straight will be on here, for example, where it's straight lines. I think it will be anyway. Let's find out. There it is, made of connected straight lines, and how important these ones, the non-examples, I think that's where the characteristics really stand out. When it's representations as well. And Jo, actually, your idea of even just having that word essential in there, now, you know, it's messed up the formatting, but I think that's really quite important. I think that's a really nice idea.
Yeah, well, the other thing, quite a few Freyers that are now coming out don't have a definition. They have essential and non-essential, which is quite interesting. So there's lots of different ways you can mix it up. I
think there's no hard and fast rule that it has to be those four things. And there are some concepts where it really fits nicely, and sometimes it's not. And I think it's almost just helpful to have those four quadrants of separating it out. But there are some times when you might want 5 or 6, but they wouldn't be quadrants then, I guess. But
so to remind everybody the importance of the website, they're all here. It's number, algebra, geometry, measure, and stats and probability. They're all there for downloading for free. You can download them all in one go as well, which is fantastic. So considering about every time I still seem to go on here and click them, and I forget I've got them all downloaded in a 9-bit file. Ridiculously useful in that respect. So let's talk about, I mean, I think we've probably answered this question because I've got a number of questions I kind of prepared beforehand. the benefits of these, and let's talk about all different types of pupils as well. Now, I think we've probably answered it in some ways, in that we're being very clear of the concept, the non-concept, but the non-standard concept as well. And as part of the 5 big ideas with the NCTM, talking about variation and the understanding of that conceptual understanding. But what else have you seen as the benefits in the classroom?
For me, vocabulary, and that's the knowledge of the subject-specific vocabulary. I've seen so many students sort of not be able to access questions because they don't know what integer means, or they don't fully understand what sum and product mean. And doing it this way, what I've found is that their retention of that specific vocabulary is really improved. It's been really noticeable since I've been doing it. And I think that's absolutely massive as our exams get more kind of literacy focused.
The other one for me, I think, is challenging students' perceptions of what they know. I found it really useful for that. Like, every primary school kid comes to secondary school knowing what a square is, until you show them one that's slightly on the angle, looks a little bit like a rhombus, anything like that. And then they don't know what a square is anymore. You know, kids don't know what straight lines are, or don't know how to tell them really properly, you know, is this line straight or is it not straight? And actually challenging their perceptions of what they don't know and opening them up to the fact that there is more here to think about than what you've been exposed to at this point. Don't get comfortable with this idea, because we are going to stretch it. And I think they're a really nice sort of single page way of just highlighting certain things around that.
They're also good for consistency and clarity. So if you go through the effort of writing it down on a Frayer model and then giving it to the kids or showing it to them, then you've got to think about it. And so rather than coming up with a definition off the top of your head in a lesson, which might be a little bit off or not that clear, it's that clarity for them. But also then if you come back to it, you're going to go back to the same definition because you've given it to them or you've got it there. And so that whenever they see that, whether it's with the same teacher or a different teacher, if you're talking across the department, it's that clarity and consistency that really helps them.
I mean, I think this is knowledge organisers are becoming more and more popular as well, and I really enjoyed doing that interview because I see them used very differently. Dare I say it, poorly in schools, but I think actually they complement really nicely in that the highlight definition can be on the knowledge organiser. But this is where the depth is. Okay, you can't put all that information for all the key words, as far as I'm concerned. Although the laughter makes me wonder if we're thinking otherwise. But I think you can have that key line, maybe what would be in the definition quarter or quadrant, sorry, on our Frayer. But the real detail and the understanding what it is also comes out on the Frayer models. And I absolutely see a role for both of them. But hopefully they don't contradict if they've been planned in alignment, let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, I'd say obviously I wrote that blurb that you've highlighted on the front of the website. Yes,
so I'm going to go back to it and just make sure that was really clear, because on the top of the website, on the homepage, you've made it. If I had to have one or the other, I don't deny, I'd probably go Frayer models. But we don't. We're in a great world where we can have both. And for the maths world, it's all about Frayer models because of the depth and conceptual understanding. And bearing in mind that the knowledge organizer, if that was enough, we wouldn't bother teaching. If that was the page, here you go, that's all you need, we wouldn't bother teaching. So yeah, that room, that line there, I'll challenge you a little bit, but I get your point.
Are you going to allow me to respond to the challenge though, Tom?
No, Tim, no, yeah, go on, go on, Pete.
Well, I mean, for me, knowledge organisers, what they do very, very well is sort of give very basic factual information. They're a great reference point for basic factual information, like, for example, bearings have to be measured from north. Yeah, bearings have to be measured clockwise. That's great for a knowledge organizer. But when you're talking about illustrating a concept, a knowledge organizer is never going to do that very, very well, as far as I can see. And the what am I talking about? The balance of concepts against factual knowledge in maths is actually way, way, way more on the concepts. And Chris Bolton's written about this as well. He's done a blog on why knowledge organisers are probably not particularly useful for most areas of maths.
Yes, indeed.
Because there's relatively little convention or factual information around those sorts of things. You know, most of it is what you might call necessary knowledge that follows, knowledge that suitably intelligent and suitably educated you could derive for yourself if you wanted to. And knowledge organisers don't seem to be set up to capture that. And like you, I've seen them used very poorly, and I'm not even going to say, dare I say, very poorly. I have seen them used poorly. I have seen them used to try and capture process and try and capture concept, and it's just too messy to be included on something like that. So for me, you know, people say knowledge organisers, what they're there to do is to quiz from and things like that. The only thing I can see where I would want to have that is like you say, just like a few of the definitions, but then I wouldn't quiz from the definitions because the definitions don't properly illustrate the concept. So I might have, you know, a knowledge organizer if I was teaching bearings and there was a lot of factual or conventional information on it, but that wouldn't be a big A4 knowledge organizer. That'd be a small sticker with the three rules on or something like that, and I could quiz from that. But in terms of those sorts of things that we want kids to really sort of have to remember from convention and things like that, there's very little of it.
So one of the things that we started doing is again, when I moved to my current school, it was like, right, great, you need knowledge organisers. And I saw them used in other subjects to really good effect. But I'm not sure that I can, aside from creating a dictionary for maths, I'm not sure I can create something that worked or is useful. I can have something, but I'm not sure. And I spent a lot of time thinking about what does work, and we started to look at sort of just essentially examples. And so what we're creating, and this is a labor of love because we're 2 years in and we're not finished yet, but we're creating example organisers, which basically collate the concept would start with a Frayer model at the top, and then we would have like 3 or 4 annotated examples in the organizer and collate that there. And then we also use it for if a student misses a lesson or if they have that there, there's that sort of Frayer examples and then a set of questions there with the answers at the back. So they've got all of that there, but it seems a bit more holistic for maths, and it retains some of that. It won't fit down on that. You can't necessarily use it for quizzing in the same sort of way, but in terms of when we're then talking about, right, what are the, like Tim, as you were saying, the consistency across the department, like what are the really key examples we need to show here, and then much more like worked examples rather than like the examples of a definition. So if you're solving an equation, it would be, you would solve a few equations and have them annotated, but I feel that gives us something that is, it works, and it retains some of that, like you're showing that concept, you're illustrating it, but it's not as sort of small.
I get what you're saying, Ben. My sort of, for me, I'd have 2 possible issues that I'd have to be keeping an eye on at least. And the first one would be teachers getting limited by those examples. I mean, we've all seen, you know, textbook examples, and for a very long time those were the only type of examples that teachers ever showed, is the sort of examples that came out of a textbook. And it took, you know, the exams suddenly switching it up and saying, but we're going to test you like this and we're going to test you like that, for a lot of the maths community to go, the maths teaching community to go, oh, 1 minute, there's more to this than just these few sort of examples that I always wheel out lesson after lesson after lesson. And I would have to, if I was doing that in my department, I'd have to keep an eye on just teachers making sure they got the breadth of the examples in their teaching and weren't limiting themselves to the type of examples. Because there's no way, I mean, unless you're creating like a 500-page book, there's no way you're going to be able to exhibit every possible example of every possible concept in that. So you're talking about boiling it down to a few key examples.
That's when you get this out, let's be honest.
Oh no, that's a different. That's a different
absolutely, yeah,
conversation.
very different.
We don't necessarily use them we wouldn't use them as a teaching resource as sort of an initial point, and it is much more, initially it is something if you missed a lesson or something there, but what I will say is that some of the best department meetings I've had are right. Like if we're going to do some CPD, we want to teach this. What examples do we use? And we have that discussion, and the meeting and the CPD and the conversations are like talking about what kind of examples you can use and how would you use them, when would you use them, is that, and having those departmental discussions then and deciding what goes in or just having those discussions, I think can be really powerful in the department.
Yeah, to be fair,
you don't use it as a teacher.
I would go with you on that 100%. The creation of those, what are the key examples, the boundary examples that we put in the Frayer model as well for those concepts.
This is where I wanted to go to make sure I mentioned, because Jo said she's introducing into the department. So already coming up with one way, it's like ask a team to fill out a Frayer model. Let's see the one on the website. Did you like it? Could we improve it? Of course we couldn't, you guys. But
they almost certainly could, Tom.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think that I'm sure that would be a great activity. What are the things you've got planned, Jo, and anyone else afterwards? How you introduce it into your department? So, Jo, how are you intending to kind of bring it into the team?
When I've introduced them before to people in the department and in workshops, I've sort of shown a couple of examples and talked through what it is and the ideas behind it, and then got people to actually make them. And it's quite interesting because people are like, oh yeah, that's good, yeah, I quite like that. But when you start to make it, it's actually really hard. It's really difficult to think of a really good definition, particularly if you haven't got access to the internet and stuff like that, which in a department meeting quite often you don't have. So you're just going off your own knowledge and working as a group to try and improve it. And then you're going to tweak it with books and the internet, but also really trying to think sort of off the top of your head about what really is an essential characteristic, for example, and what's a really good non-example that will explode some misconceptions. Actually, it really makes you think, and you realise just how hard they are to make. Well, anybody can make them, but to make them really good, it's not easy. And I've spent hours on them sometimes because you get a bit obsessed. But so to try and balance it so you produce something really good within a reasonable time frame. You're going to improve and improve and improve because people always suggest improvements, and children often do. Actually, it's a real skill, and I don't think until you've tried to do it yourself that you realise how hard it is, especially for some of the some of the more difficult topics to define and discuss in maths. It's a real eye-opener, and I think it gets some great discussions going, and it tends to sell it to people because they're like, I mean, these are really actually quite good. Oh yeah. Is
there anyone else who can introduce it to the department a certain way, and then I think we'll move on to the uses in the classroom? They might end up intertwining somewhat, actually. But Tim, I think you.
Yeah, I was just going to say very similar to Jo, actually, just that that process of giving teachers a blank page and saying, right, write your own. And then we're going to come together and we're going to compare them. And invariably you get different definitions. You've got different characteristics picked up. The examples, people haven't got all the examples they might want. They look at other people's and find things they didn't think of. And it's a fantastic way of bringing a department or a group together to really make them think about that. If you do it for a topic you're about to teach, it really starts to get you thinking really deeply about what is it you want to try and communicate to the pupils if you've got to try and put it on a page like that.
It's the first time that, Jo, you mentioned the word misconception and how powerful the misconceptions are. I said about the non-example, but actually the creation of those and that conversation about the misconceptions, that is really, really powerful. Can we talk about the uses in the classroom then? Because I know I made a mistake this week. I gave it out and I was like, here you go. And I know I did get them to look at the examples, non-examples, but I didn't address the whole thing. And as soon as the end of the lesson, I thought, I know I haven't used it properly today. And so what about that use in the classroom? And maybe you should actually start this by the introduction to it to the pupils. So for the first time, how have you introduced them? Because you could just throw it at them like I stupidly did and didn't think about, here you go, you guys, this is important because. So let's talk about the introduction and then its uses. So how have you introduced it to your classes, everyone? I love that silence every question I ask, by the way.
We all wait to see who's going to go in.
Just shout over each other and then we'll argue.
So,
usually you, Pete. Yeah.
So, yes. Okay. So, actually, I don't see necessarily a massive problem with just handing it over, but talking about it in reference to some stimulus that you might have used before, something like that. So, the way I've done it very often is in illustrating a concept that we've done through the board, through maybe use of like non-examples and examples, my turn, your turn, that sort of thing. So displaying, I'll give a specific example, looking at different types of triangles. So we have a lesson in year 7 where we examine different types of triangles and their properties and things of that nature. And so we'll have some my turns around whether a triangle is isosceles or not, and then we'll have some your turns about whether a triangle is isosceles or not, and things like that. And then based on that, we might have some discussion about, what are what makes a triangle isosceles, what characteristics does an isosceles triangle have, things like that. And then I'll hand over the Frayer model and go, oh, well, look, here's everything we've seen and said already captured pretty much on there. Is it already captured? Can you add from the discussion to it, the discussion we've had to it, and things like that? So rather than throwing it at them and then talking about it, actually having done a bit of work around that concept already, and then, here's something that captures that all really nicely together. And by the way, I'm going to quiz you on these bits on it to next time, and things like that as well. So, it is going to be useful for you to see and look at. I think that's typically the way I've introduced them to a Frayer model. And then once you've used them for 2 or 3 different concepts, they're used to seeing them and they're used to what you're going to talk about with them.
Did anyone do anything different with regards to their introduction?
Yeah, I don't show them the Frayer model from the site at all, and not until right at the end. I model one on the board for them, so we talk it through, and we discuss it, and they watch, hopefully listen and take things in. Depending on the ability of the group, if it's a weak group, I'll leave some key things on the board for them, and then they fill it in, they do their own, and then we compare it to one that has been done earlier, which obviously is whipped off the website usually. And that's quite interesting, because it's interesting to compare what they've got and what they haven't got, and to see if actually the whole class between them have covered all the ideas. It can be really interesting, and I think they get quite a lot from it if they have a go at making it themselves.
It could make them on
But
their
they do need a lot of guidance, and then they do need a lot of support with it. They're not easy to do, but I think they get better. You see, the first few they do are pretty basic, but then certainly with all ability groups, it's really noticeable in the high ability group how quickly they suddenly start producing some really good stuff and criticising yours legitimately.
You could get the whiteboards out and get them all using their mini whiteboards, and then so they're not feeling the stuff, they can then get rid of the mistakes and whatnot, and then they can make a really good one at the end, something they're proud of as a collective. It's a lovely idea doing that way. Tim, Ben, was there anything different you've done when you're introducing to your classrooms?
Yes, sometimes what I do is I'll introduce them sort of gradually over a lesson, maybe starting with the examples and non-examples when we're talking about some questions, usually with the definition coming last. So sort of if I'm building up their understanding of something, then I want to show them examples, show them non-examples. We talk about the characteristics and we'll show those. And then when they've got all of those elements clear in their heads, then I'll show them definition that sort of pulls it all together, so that definition isn't thrown at them when they don't really understand the words in it and what it means, but they see it when they understand everything that's behind it. That works quite well.
Ben, anything different, or is sadly all the good ideas?
I think covered well, which is mostly what I do. I think one thing that I have learned the hard way is that there's if you're getting them to write their own, that can work quite well. But I think they're probably best printed out if you know what you want. If you've decided what you want them to copy down, probably don't spend what could take up to 20 minutes copying it down, because that's. I think it can be something like, great, we'll get that in the book. I don't need to print it out, and then it can be quite an onerous task, which is actually not a helpful one.
So again, what Joe just said about Tim earlier on, you said about the year group. Joe, you said about the attainment or the performance of the group. That copying can take so long, and when I work with trainees, they'll be like, "Oh, they'll write down the title in 10 seconds." I'm like, "No, they won't." Writing takes longer than that, and you learn through time. Let's talk about the uses then. So now it's been introduced, and they're aware of the Frayer model. Now, of course, some of the introduction techniques you've used there are uses, but there are other further uses in the classroom. I know I've got one, but I'm letting everyone else go first.
Yeah, we've all paused again. So, I mean, there's all sorts, isn't there? You know, I get them to add things to it, add their own example, add their own non-example. You know, we talked about some of the ways in introducing about getting them to fill in certain things. I will get them to fill in certain sections as a way of quizzing them. Maybe if they've seen the full model previously, give them another copy of it with with the definition removed, or some of the characteristics removed, or even just some blanks where the keywords are in some of the characteristics and things like that, and get them to fill that in first of all without looking back to their original, and then you know, if they then need to, they can go and check against their original and things like that. Yeah, deleting whole sections of non-examples and saying, right, design your own non-examples for this then now, that sort of thing. Loads of basically what boils down to either adaptation or recreation.
It's low stakes testing. We're talking about that a lot. And no pressure there. Anything else anybody does in particular?
I've done similar to the thing you're going to bring up, so I won't bring it up now. But the other one,
I'll share. God, because I mentioned it before, didn't I? Before we start recording. But God, I'll bring that up in a minute.
I'll let you know. But the other one is to do a sort of slideshow of frame models with the actual word in the middle missing. So you show them the frame model and they have to work backwards and say, oh, it's a prime number. And it's quite interesting, particularly if you link similar ones together, because I find quite often children, especially year 7 coming up from primary, get square and prime mixed up. So showing them a few and making sure they actually get the correct word with the correct sort of frame model is quite good. And it's quite a nice starter to do a few of those. Ready, just blank those words out, 10 on the whiteboard, off you go.
The class I was referring to, my 8s, where I'm doing highest common factor, lowest common multiple. But as always, what's a factor, what's a multiple, and we get them confused. So I really have tried to take my time, and the models on the website are really nice for that. However, I remember a day where I was teaching year 7. I was doing so as you referred to, Jo, because I told you about this just before we started recording. I put some mistakes on there, and I always like to spot the mistake because they really stare. And I've really got to read this, and I've really got to find it, etc. And I went for a misspelling of trapezium there. Sadly, it's given away because of the underlining as well. So that one stands out a little bit. I will let people freeze the screen and look at that another time. But in fact, have I put the mistakes on? Yes, I have. Brilliant. It's not at least one pair of parallel sides. It's one pair of parallel sides.
Oh, now you are opening up a can of worms.
I know I am. I know I am, but
you are opening up a proper worm can.
This was from your website where it didn't say that. It said one pair of parallel lines. Now I put that in there, and in my skit session last week, I suddenly hesitated and thought, hold on a second. Does it have at least, or is it? And so, but there's the fun. We couldn't do what was on Twitter last week. We couldn't even agree negative 7.5. What's it round to? 4,000 votes. 4,000 votes.
Obviously, there's no strong agreement on that. And again, we have chosen the definition. Well, I can't remember who wrote that one. I think that's one of mine. Looking at some of the images on it, but I have chosen the exclusive definition there. But you know, you can't be sat here on a YouTube and say that for definite that's a mistake.
I'm going for this dictionary of mathematics next to me here. Okay, so I got this in my training year. A quadrilateral has one pair of opposite sides parallel, the other pair being non-parallel.
Which is the exclusive definition, yes.
Yeah, everyone listens to the Penguin Dictionary of Mathematics.
It's almost as if you have that page ready.
I didn't. I didn't know that was coming. I'm pleased that helped me out because that could have made me look bad. Thank you, Penguin.
Do you want me to get my 1970s dictionary?
Please do. Go, you know what?
See what it says to them. I'm going to talk to me about my wife when I started teaching, and I was like, cheers, great. And then actually now it's one of the things that I use most when I'm doing.
What's it say on the NCTM glossary? Okay, hold on a second. Let's go to that. But these are great conversations.
I feel like we may be going down the rabbit hole.
Where did I put it? Here we go. So find trapezium. Oops. There it is. With exactly one pair of sides parallel. Brilliant.
I'm not disputing that definition exists. That's the one we use. I'm saying that you can't be telling all those people that use the other definition that they're wrong. Not unless you want to get you don't want to get some hateful comments on the bottom of this YouTube video when's all said and done.
It doesn't take a lot to get those to happen. So that's fine.
I've got a four-sided figure having one pair of sides parallel. The diagonals are unequal and do not bisect each other.
See, that's an example of, would you want to use that when you were designing your Frayer model? Versus, I mean, that one on the NC10 was quite basic, quite nice, getting to the point of what you wanted with exactly one pair of parallel lines. And so it's often thinking about how deep we do want to go. And it's funny, I get the idea of quizzing. I've thought about the idea of quizzing before, but I hadn't really thought about it apart from mistakes. But I was quizzing there, wasn't I? And the examples you gave there, Pete, it's all about the quizzing. I love what you said, Joe, about here's one. You know, you can make some kind of game show. Fill in the blank. Yeah. Yes, blankety blank, blankety blank, blank, blank. And just
quite like that.
Yeah, they won't know what blankety blank is unless I dress as Lily Savage, and they still won't know. I can't play the piano like Les Dawson, so never mind. I think we talked about the benefits, and I think we almost glossed over the fact that with the consistency of language, it's a real scaffold for EAL across the classroom and for everybody else as well, and have those high expectations. Speaking like a mathematician, I've written in my list of questions here which classrooms ages is this for, and I don't see a limit.
Everyone.
I just for everybody.
Absolutely, and I think that's absolutely right as well. And your website shares, there's plenty of them for primary and secondary as well. I want to make sure that's
100%. Yeah, there's plenty of stuff in there that that's taught at primary, and that takes you all the way through the secondary curriculum. Or sorry, the school level curriculum, not just the secondary curriculum.
I know one question I did write was where it's used in the classroom lesson and the learning journey. And I think we've kind of answered that as well, that it's part of the introduction, it's been built as part of the introduction. With these quizzings, we've given ideas of how it can be used in revision as well. Is there anything we've missed out? If we're coming towards the end of this, it's awesome. I really enjoyed it. Is there anything you think we've missed out about the Frayer model, and you're going to go after and think, I know I should have mentioned that?
I think one thing.
Oh, go on.
Sorry, Ben, you go.
No, go on.
Okay, so one thing I find, particularly actually working with teachers, but then with the pupils as well, is if you've got some concept like you were talking about with the factors and multiples, or even closely related things, that actually defining them on a Frayer model and the differences between those things is really helpful. So there's some examples that we're going to put up on the website soon. There's three particularly, one for line segment, and one for ray, which are very close concepts, and people don't always have a clear idea of the difference between them. So actually having Frayer models for that, the discussion around those with teachers is fantastic, and then with the pupils in the classroom as well.
Go on, Tim, you prepared these, and I know you haven't put them on the website, and you told us before recording that you prepared these. So go on, you can't just, you've got to share them. So I guess
show them.
The big reveal. You've underwhelmed it there, Tim.
Well,
with that.
So here's the first. So I like these because they've got some diagrams and things on them as well, which I think is always nice. So line. Now you can pull apart the definitions if you want to, if we've got time. But that's a line, and then we've got line segment. And then we've got ray, and what I've got in there is the non-examples include the other two.
That's really
so we've got that comparison between the three, and we're looking at what one is and then what it isn't by looking at the other two as well. So it's quite specific, and there's lots of other things we could add in there, but that's one way we've used a sort of a set of them, if you like, rather than being just an individual.
That's a really good idea.
That's really nice. I mean, mean, mode and median just suddenly shot into my head because they're so often confused. And if we taught them using those together, that would be really good. And using non-examples as the others. Really like that.
Absolutely.
See, that was worse. Just Tim, you weren't studying that one well enough. That was awesome. I don't think enough about line and line segments and rays. Actually, that's just so quick for me with the comparison. What's the same? What's different? One of my favourite questions in the classroom. What else? Those final few moments before we get to the no textbook required, where I humiliate myself and play silly music.
For me, I mean, like Tim was saying, absolutely. In terms of subject knowledge for teachers, in terms of just that depth and breadth and consistency across your department, is massive. I think for me, I guess the etymology and morphology is, I delved into a rabbit hole when we started making this and going down. I think that it's knowing when it's useful and when it is helpful and builds, and when sometimes it might not. And there are times that you can sort of have arguments either way, So a fairly common one would be knowing the sort of morphology of units, so centimeters, millimeters, and there's the base unit, the SI unit of meter, but then there's centi, milli, which would be 100,000, and then there's kilo, which is 1,000, and in a different language. But they're fairly common prefixes that can be really helpful, and you can see really like why. Oh yeah, that's why we call it a centimeter. Whereas I've had an argument. I still feel that there's value in talking about the hypotenuse. The reason it's called the hypotenuse, it's not just some made-up word. It actually means it's the hypotenuse. It's the stretch under. So it was actually, our traditional version of a right-angled triangle, we would think of it sort of, I guess, that way around with the hypotenuse on top. If it was that way around with the hypotenuse on bottom, it would be the length, the line segment, I guess, that stretches under the right angle. And so it comes from, it's the stretch underneath the right angle. And so there's just some context there, rather than this is the hypotenuse, which is, often when you're talking about it, it's like, particularly when you're talking about trigonometry, oh, this is the opposite side because of this. This is the adjacent side because of this. This one's the hypotenuse because it is. Like having some of that context can be really helpful. Whereas sometimes it's just really dense and doesn't make sense. So, just you need to decide when's it appropriate, when's it not appropriate. Sometimes it doesn't help teaching. It doesn't help the students understand what they're doing.
It's making connections, isn't it? And when there's opportunities to make those connections with other words as well. And we know that making connections in maths in particular, we need it to make those connections, to make things stick and stick to previously learned knowledge. So, but there was something I think you said you wanted to show us on that before we started recording. You mentioned about...
So, I mean, in terms of sort of word definitions, I've picked up a couple of books along the way, and these were recommended by Jo Morgan. Which, I mean, this one's great, but it's quite rare to find now. But actually, one of the best places to do it is Google. So we were, get my screen up. If you any word, if you just type in the word and definition, so we looked up at trigonometry, and it brings up the dictionary definition, but it also then there's a space for you to stretch under, to bring it down, and it gives you like the word roots. So it'll tell you the roots of the word. It'll give you that etymology, where it comes from, and you can see where it is and how it's used and where it's from. So I guess you could do it for. I'm hoping this works from here.
Got some nice links there to the parts of it as well, trigonometry.
Yeah. So hypotenuse definition, it brings up hypotenuse. You drop down that, and it shows you its, the origin. It's late 17th century from the Greek, the subtending line, from the hupo under tenine stretch, so the stretch under. Yeah. It gives it's quite a quick way of finding some of that.
That's awesome. I love seeing just basic things that I wouldn't have known before. That's fabulous. This is the 12th episode of ResourceFULL, and I don't know when they'll end. Hopefully never. But I'm wondering if this next segment does need to come to an end. I think the resultant is good, and that we get some nice feedback from you. But at the moment, I have to introduce it in a particular way. And I haven't chosen to drop it yet because... Well, I don't know. I felt I had the preparation. If you know the song, feel free to sing along and let's have a listen, because this is how we get there.
No.
There's some math that's been on my mind. It's all online. No textbook required.
Yeah. No one. Okay, fine.
No.
You know the words by now, really.
Well, you would have thought so. I mime it each time. I'm not anti-textbook. I say it every time. I simply love how much is shared online. And again, to all four of you, thank you for doing what you've done. But I don't. The point is, there is so much good stuff. You need to give it thought as to why you use it. And that's why I'm enjoying these so much, these interviews, because we've talked very clearly about the mistake I made this week. I gave it out and I didn't think about it. And I know I could have used it so much better. I'm hoping we all recognise the classic 80s artist from which I've been singing and covering, and his superb No Jacket Required album. However, your favourite online resources and why? Now, I have taken these beforehand and I can't remember whose told me. So whose was Maths Emporium?
This was me.
Ben, talk us through.
Yeah, I mean, I went through earlier and looked at the others. So I tried to think of some ones that I've not seen mentioned before. So the Maths Emporium is EdXL's sort of maths support, but particularly for GCSE mathematics, there's a real like wealth of stuff that goes underneath, aside from just having past papers and things like that. So if you go into GCSE maths, and one MAA1. They have chosen a fairly unique style of presenting their file system, which they decided to keep when they made their new website. But you know, I love Graham Cummings and I trust him, so that's his choice. But some of the things that I really like are in the practice papers and questions. Some of their themed papers that they've made can just be great. And the other thing that is really worth highlighting are the shadow papers as well, which are exam papers, but just with the same questions, but the words changed. No, the words will stay the same. The numbers will change.
Okay.
So if you want to do we've had a lot of success at doing a paper as a class and doing a shadow paper version and doing that. And we actually, this was before they came out, and we all did it ourselves, and we changed all the numbers. We did that as a class together, and then it's like, right, do the real one. They were really useful. So they sort of mirror the papers. And the final thing, just talking about vocabulary, and it can be useful to, perhaps illustrate to some of your teachers, but also help the students. I think in the themed papers, they've got wordy questions, but where they've changed all the words to change some of the words to gobbledygook.
Right.
I guess they would be in, yeah.
Is that in here?
Yeah, I think so. It's called it'll be like it's got an acronym in it. It's like NASWN or something like that.
Okay.
Maybe they've done it for the legacy. They have done it for the legacies as well.
Oh.
This one here, then, is that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one.
Will it download quickly, or will it take forever? I'm now intrigued.
Here's the gamble.
Let's have a look. Let's give it one more try, and then excellent. Well, we've got to have a look now. Now you suggested it anyway.
But there's wordy problems where they've just got the standard wordy problems, but they've also then taken almost taken the context to its.
This is well prepared, by the way. We clearly gave this great thought.
So.
There you go. They will make a Privadeet Gazetting. Oh, nice. Yeah. They will buy two.
It's a Beck and a Molody as well.
You'll buy 2 Vec Vaishis and 1 Molody Vashai.
And
excellent.
I've tried using them with classes before, and they can find that a bit overwhelming. But actually, in terms of for some of your EAL kids, you need you're essentially you need to teach them the skills of decoding the questions. And actually sort of playing matchup of that, like, right, find where it says Vec. What's a Vec? Go back in. Okay, it's on the top of that table. Mm-hmm. But also in the department, just a bit of an experience of what it can be like facing a paper, but why vocabulary is so important and why we do things like the Frayer models, because we've got to build some of that vocabulary up so that students aren't experiencing that in the actual GCSE.
Ben, your other option was the Secondary Mastery Professional Development documentation released later on this year, and they've got 6 broad mathematical themes. Why? I know you're trying to choose one that haven't been chosen before, so why this one? What how can you use these?
Yeah, we're exploring more as a department in terms of how we use multiple representations, and it's quite new for a lot of us, and there are some good books out there that you could read to look at multiple representations. There are some all right books out there as well. but they, you know, in terms of actually some of the guidance on how you can use some of those multiple representations are really, really clear, really, really useful, and they're great, particularly if you're not that confident or if you've not used them before. They're really comprehensive.
I got distracted, I'm afraid, then, because I obviously had to try and find Pete's book and hold it up then. I do have a copy, but I don't know where I've put it. Oh, it's holding up the table. There it is. Just let me know.
Oh, what?
There you go. Joe's getting her. Joe's helping me out. I don't know. Oh, there it is. Just because I don't want to be seen to be mean. There we go. I've got my copy. I need to get that signed one day.
Mine's already signed.
Who chose Resourceaholic? Always a good choice.
That was me.
Joe, your reasons for choosing this, if they're not obvious.
Well, this is this is the one. I'm amazed there are still some people out there that don't know about this, but there really are.
Yeah.
It's just brilliant. You could talk about it for hours. For most teachers, the place that's really useful is you've lost it actually. If you scroll back up to the top.
Yeah.
Sorry. Across here, if you're looking, you're thinking, oh, got to teach something on collecting like terms or something, you go into algebra, you find that, and Joe's listed, you know, a whole range of really good resources so that you can just get in there and find something that's going to be good, because all the ones on there that I've seen are really, really good. Rarely have I come across a resource that doesn't work or isn't particularly great. So that's the obvious go-to when you're doing your lesson planning or having a think about what you want in your lesson. But then the gems are also awesome. Every week, or not every week, but regularly these gems come out. They're always good. There's always new stuff in there. There's stuff I haven't seen before in there. And again, when I clicked on it, it's something she's already looked at. So you know it's going to be good. You know it's going to be worth your time. And it's just absolutely, it is the most useful planning resource out there. It's brilliant. And it's completely free.
You can sign up for these emails. And it's almost the highlights of Twitter, isn't it?
It's like just brilliant. And I mean, Jo must spend hours sorting these out because they're really good. And I don't think I've ever not learned something new from a gems post, and she's done 134 of them now.
The interview I did with her, she just didn't give herself enough credit for the amount of work she's done. I can never think. It
must take her hours.
But she should be so proud of what's done. 40-odd thousand people following her, just phenomenal. There are other exam boards available from Pearson, and you chose AQA.
Yeah, because it's partly because it's the exam board we do. There is, pretty much like the Emporium, there's a lot of useful stuff on there. I really, really like the topic tests. I find them really useful because they give examples of the sort of questions that come up, and particularly the higher ones, they're really quite challenging. They're not the normal, they're just questions with twists. They're questions that really make the students think. I use them a lot for a plenary or for an exit ticket. I think they're great, and the more I use them, the better I think they are.
Awesome. Of course, again, there are other exam boards available. Colin Foster. Now, we didn't discuss Colin Foster's. This was yours, Tim. Sorry.
It was, yeah. So lots of people know Colin's mathematical etudes, or however you pronounce it. But this is one that I really like. These books were published in the early 2000s, and now they're out of print, I think, and now freely available. So they're basically just full of loads of stuff. And if you click on one, I'd choose one at random, but basically he says with them, there are things often that you can just jump into in a lesson without lots of prep. So they're not sort of fully formed tasks, but it's a whole series of ideas and things to think about and starting points on whatever topic. So you just scroll down, he's basically just numbered ideas and things there with his notes about how you might use them or things to think about. And it's just a really good treasure trove, really. If you want to think about a topic and you want some starting points with a class, I always find them really useful.
And each of these are tasks that are clearly reasoning with explanation behind straight. Just even looking at them now, they're immediately thinking questions.
Yes, and they're thinking questions that are there for you. You don't need to go away and do loads of work yourself, although I'd always recommend spending some time thinking about it. But he's put the thought into it, and when it's Colin, you know that anything that's in there is going to be well thought out and it's going to be really helpful.
I know I used one today with my trainees. Well, do you think etudes, do we know for certain, or is it my ignorance?
I'm sure I've heard him pronounce it, but I can't remember what he said. So
You're going to have to get Colin on a ResourceFULL, Tom, and then you can ask him.
That's a fabulous idea. Talking of which, by the way, going back to the NCTM, they agreed today. So, yeah, they're going to have with the new look website. So I've got a meeting next week. Looking forward to that. Final one, and then I can leave you to your evening because it is getting late. Tim, you also chose STEM learning resources.
I did. So again, a treasure trove of stuff. Really, it's not always stuff you can pull out and just use straight away in a classroom. But there's loads of stuff that's been published often quite a long time ago and then out of print. But you can find loads of brilliant stuff. I just found a couple of really great tasks. I'm going to show you one very quickly. I'm going to take
Go for it. Still the screen.
I'm going to still screen and quickly show you. So this is one that I like. That it's just something that I wouldn't necessarily have thought to do, but it's bringing together quadratics and primes. Maybe you're doing some substitution. You want something a bit different, and you've got an opportunity to bring back in another topic with prime numbers. Really, it's a substitution task, but it's also getting to explore what quadratics look like, how they're structured, and look at prime numbers at the same time. So that was great. There's loads of others there. This one I thought was quite interesting. If you want to look at binary numbers and fractions, how often do we look at binary and go into decimals with it? That's quite nice. So there's all sorts of stuff like that. You just dive in and spend hours finding bits and pieces that's in there. So it's well worth a look.
Awesome. Obviously, for anyone who's watching this and not watched any of the previous episodes, Pete's been on twice before, so I'm not asking him. I'm not being impolite. He's just he's taking up enough time as it is. And talking of taking enough time, I've taken enough of yours this evening. But also, you've given so much time to so many people. And that's what I'm enjoying about these websites. All the people who have been kind enough to come and join me to have a chat is because you've given time to share these, and they should be shared, and they should be discussed, and they should be celebrated. I'm hoping we have some more converts to the Frayer model, and we have more. Everyone has greater ideas, using them, taking them forward. But thank you all for taking the time to make this website, and also taking the time to have a chat with me on the episode this evening. Thank you all again.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers, Tom.
Bye.